Examining the events that impact and shape China and the rest of the world. This is the Beijing Hour, 1 hour of news and information brought to you every weekday. Now here's your host.
Shane Bigham with you on this Thursday, March 25th, 2021. You're listening to the Beijing Hour, live from the Chinese capital. On today's program, China's State Council Information Office has released a report on human rights violations in the United States. The Chinese government's issued guidelines to make the country's manufacturing sector stronger. The British Prime Minister has warned against blockades affecting vaccine supply chains.
I would just gently point out to anybody considering a blockade or an interruption of supply chains that companies may look at such actions and draw conclusions about whether or not it is sensible to make future investments in countries where, arbitrary blockades are imposed.
In business, China's major state-owned banks are now promoting the country's digital currency. In sports, the Olympic torch relay in Tokyo. In culture and entertainment, a new show at the Shanghai International Dance Center. Now today's top stories. Chinese authorities have said the China-EU investment agreement was designed to benefit both sides and is not a gift given by one side to the other. The statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry came after the European Parliament cancelled a meeting to discuss the deal. China and the EU jointly announced the completion of negotiations on the agreement at the end of last year. Chinese government spokespersons rebuked certain European countries for summoning Chinese ambassadors after China announced sanctions against 10 individuals and 4 entities within the EU. The spokesperson said prior to the Chinese sanctions, the EU had unilaterally sanctioned Chinese individuals and entities under the pretext of alleged human rights issues in Xinjiang, which were based on nothing but lies and false information. The official also said the EU acted first with an unreasonable provocation, and China simply responded in a legitimate and just manner. A report focused on human rights violations in the United States last year showed that over 41,000 Americans died by gun violence in 2020, an average of more than 110 per day. The report was issued by China's State Council Information Office. Citing data from Gun Violence Archive, it also shows that nearly 600 mass shootings took place across the U.S. last year, or more than 1.6 a day on average. The report also says ethnic minorities in the United States are devastated by racial discrimination and growing polarization between rich and poor as aggravated social inequality. With more on this, we spoke to Harvey Zoden, a senior fellow with the Center for China and Globalization. What is your main takeaway from this report on the human rights situation in the United States?
Well, President Biden has made human rights abroad a U.S. priority issue. But the Bible tells us that only he who is without sin should cast the first stone. In other words, don't criticize others unless your own record is spotless. So before the U.S. pulls its holier-than-thou act against China, as it did last week in Alaska, it should first get its own house in order. The sad fact is that the ideals students learn in American history classes are, after 2.5 centuries, still more fiction than reality. Even before the American Revolution in 1776, racism was a part of the U.S.'s DNA, and it still is. We have not, in the words of our Constitution, established justice, ensured domestic tranquility, or promoted the general welfare. Racism against black people, who as slaves were counted as 3/5 of a white person in the Constitution. While no nation is perfect, the Chinese report reminds us on a yearly basis that so much work remains to be done in the U.S., where white supremacy still reigns supreme.
Well, how complicated is the issue of discrimination against minority groups in the United States amid COVID-19?
The Chinese report is fact-based, and if you rely on facts, it's not at all complicated because the facts speak for themselves. Trump wanted America first, and he got it. The U.S. is still way first in COVID cases and deaths. To Biden's credit, he's quickly reversing the situation. But that doesn't help the 30 million plus Americans who've been infected or the more than 500,000 who died. It's a sharp contrast to China. So as the report notes, U.S. minorities have suffered disproportionately from COVID, particularly blacks and Native Americans. Asians in the U.S. have suffered differently, as evidenced most recently in Atlanta a week ago. Asians have been discriminated against in the U.S. since the mid-19th century. So, as China did, Asians in America also have had a century of humiliation, and they still do. For decades, Chinese women were effectively prevented from immigrating to the U.S. by the Page Act of 1875, and Chinese men by the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. That name says it all.
Well, how can the Biden administration identify the underlying causes of gun-related crimes and address such violence?
When Trump and his fellow racist Republicans pushed the notion of the Kung Flu and the China virus last year to deflect their own incompetence, there was a significant uptick in hate crimes against Asians in America. These were not merely against Chinese, because most Americans think all Asians look alike and they can't tell the difference. Asians in America who would have never previously dreamed of owning guns bought them in record numbers after the media filled up with reports of anti-Asian hate crimes. In America, we have more guns than people, and it's easier to get a gun than to register to vote or even to adopt a dog. It's because of the pro-gun National Rifle Association, a lobby feared by politicians at all levels. Thanks to them, for a quarter century, the U.S. government was not even allowed to research gun violence. That prohibition was lifted in 2019, and the first research was funded less than a year ago. So the Congress still doesn't have enough data on which to write legislation, let alone have the votes to pass meaningful, effective gun safety laws. This desperate situation is almost hopeless.
That was Harvey Zoden, Senior Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, talking about the human rights situation in the United States. The Chinese foreign minister has begun a tour of the Middle East. Wang Yi will pay official visits to Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. The trip also includes a working visit to Oman. With more on this, Guangzhou spoke to Dr. Nikolai Du-Gunderson, a political analyst based in the UK.
What role has China been playing in helping Middle East countries fight against the pandemic?
At this point, China has been very focused on sending medical aid and medical teams to certain countries such as Egypt and Morocco. There's also been a lot of donations of masks and medical supplies to the Gulf states. I also want to stress that some of these items have been donated by Chinese citizens to show citizen-to-citizen solidarity as opposed to only government-to-government solidarity between China and the Middle East.
Chinese foreign minister's trip will include 4 Gulf Cooperation Council members, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Oman. What is the status quo of bilateral cooperation between China and each of the members?
Relations between China and the Gulf states remains quite strong and quite open. We still see strong investment, mutual investment, and also cultural ties. There's still talk of eventual resumption of student exchanges. Also, of course, because of COVID, cooperation rests mainly on medical assistance. However, the UAE considers promotion or continues to promote Chinese students coming to the Emirates because they are open, their case numbers are low even during COVID. Also, the Emirates continues to teach Mandarin to Emiratis, and of course these classes are now available online.
And finally, what is your take on the prospect of China's promotion of Belt and Road cooperation with Turkey and Iran?
Well, for Iran, China does have a fairly good relationship with Iran, and it is turning to Iran for increasing oil imports, looking to expand its relationship as part of a balanced approach to the Gulf, so not just the GCC states, but also Iran as well. For its role, Iran is seeking partners in Asia at this time amid tensions between the West and also between itself and the GCC. When it comes to Turkey of course is part of the corridor into Eurasia. Since 2015, we've seen increasing infrastructure projects in Turkey that have been part financed by China itself.
That was political analyst Nikolai Du-Gunderson talking about the Chinese foreign minister's trip to the Middle East. Zimbabwean President Emerson Mnangagwa has been given his first jab of COVID-19 vaccine made by China. Gao Jr. has more.
It is now my singular honor and privilege to declare the national COVID-19 Phase 2 program official launch by me being jabbed.
Emerson Mnangagwa received his first shot of China's Sinovac vaccine at a public hospital in the resort town of Victoria Falls. He has also launched the second phase of the country's vaccination drive, stepping up efforts to fight the pandemic. Mnangagwa has once again thanked China for standing with Zimbabwe against COVID-19.
I would like to take this opportunity to once again express my profound gratitude to the People's Republic of China for the donation of vaccine doses. Their support and acts of solidarity have gone a long way in ensuring our success or access to the life-saving vaccine doses.
Zimbabwe is now rolling out a vaccination campaign in Victoria Falls to get all the adults jabbed in an effort to restart the tourism industry in a world-renowned destination. Mnangagwa says his government is determined to revive the tourism industry and the economy as a whole.
The launch of this Phase 2 vaccination program here in the city of Victoria Falls attests to my government's desire to guarantee that the economic journey continues with even greater momentum. This intensification vaccination exercise should in turn pave way for the growth of unlimited tourism activities in the country.
The COVID-19 pandemic has dealt a huge blow to Victoria Falls, where most of the residents live on tourism. An estimated 50% of jobs have been lost. Many local people have pinned their hopes on the vaccination program to recover the tourism industry. For the Beijing Hour, I'm Gao Junya reporting from Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe.
Coming up, new guidelines to strengthen the manufacturing sector in China.
The Beijing Hour.
Hello, I'm Peter Dinklage from X-Men Days of Future Past. You are listening to the Beijing Hour.
Hi, I'm Kathy Freeman, and you're listening to the Beijing Hour.
Hi everyone, I'm Lang Lang. Welcome to the Beijing Hour.
The Beijing Hour, your window to China and the world.
We're at 12 minutes past the hour. The Chinese government's issued a wide-ranging policy guideline to make the country's manufacturing sector stronger. It comes as manufacturing and the real economy take an increasingly central role in China's economic strategies. Sui has more.
Changhong is a state-owned home appliances manufacturer founded in 1958. Now, its factories are powered by 5G and industrial internet technologies. Chief Scientist Zhang Huayi says engineers are trying to further tap into the potential of artificial intelligence.
We have already used AI and computer vision technology to detect product defects in some of our subordinate factories. I believe AI has two things to tackle in the future. Firstly, how can it use very little data to master certain function? And secondly, how can we enable AI technology to have its own reasoning and thinking abilities?
After years of digitalization, over 95% of Changhong's logistical processes are now fully automated. China's manufacturing sector is digitalizing rapidly, but the government says there's still a long way to go. In a policy directive issued this week, the central government says automation of the sector is still lacking in quality, professionalism, and marketization. Minister of Industry and Information Technology Xiao Ya-qing says China's manufacturing sector is neither resilient nor competitive enough.
The first thing we need to do is to maintain an intact industrial chain. We need to build that chain strong by strengthening the weak links and ensure manufacturing will also be a pillar industry, and that chain will in no circumstances break. The second is to pursue high-quality development, to take further steps in high-end, intelligent, and green sectors, and further elevate the level of manufacturing.
Xiao says all this requires comprehensive and coordinated policies rather than picking champions and making irrational investments. In the latest policy package jointly issued by 13 central government departments, industry regulators are tasked with identifying 10 manufacturing sectors and 20 industrial scenarios to test the implication of 5G and industrial internet. The policy document has also set a target to better empower small and medium-sized businesses with digital technologies and services. Chinese policymakers are fully aware of the importance of a strong manufacturing sector, which is a policy priority in the country's 14th five-year plan. For the Beijing Hour, I'm Su Yi.
China is less than 10 years away from achieving its peak carbon emissions target. After that, there are only 30 years until the deadline of becoming carbon neutral by 2060. Compared with developed countries, China will achieve these goals in less time and with more difficulties. Ecology and Environment Minister Huang Runqiu says the nation will continue to improve its low-carbon policies and market systems for the green transformation of the economy. Huang says that in the face of complex challenges, China will follow a high-quality growth path, putting the environment first with green and low-carbon development.
China will steadily implement a dual control system of carbon intensity and total amount, support places which have the conditions and key industries to take the lead in peaking carbon emission, build a clean, low-carbon, safe and efficient energy system, control the total amount of fossil energy, implement renewable energy alternative actions, further promote the low-carbon transformation in industry, construction, and transportation.
China's been the world's largest investor in renewable energies. In 2018, China's investment in renewables reached over $91 billion, accounting for almost a third of the world's total. China currently ranks first in the world in capacity for wind power, hydroelectric power, and photovoltaic power. Its efforts have already yielded results. Official data shows that the amount of carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP decreased by nearly 50% in the country from 2005 to 2020, as China achieved its target for a 40 to 45% emissions reduction ahead of schedule. And with more on this, Guoyan spoke to Lin Boqiang, a senior expert in new energies and a professor at Xiamen University.
China vowed to become carbon neutral within 30 years after its carbon emission peak by 2030. That is half the time it took for some Western countries to achieve the goal. What do you make of the ambitious target?
To put it this way, China has the largest energy system, 80% fossil fuel. That's one. Second, this system still expanding. That is say that the energy demand is still increasing. So put these two together, the task is enormous. It's very complex, very difficult. But China need to do this because most of the developed countries will achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. If China do not achieve carbon neutrality by 2060, that's about 10 years different. It will be very difficult to meet the carbon targets set by the Paris Agreement. So China will have to do this to fulfill its international obligation in terms of climate change.
How can China deal with some major challenges in order to accomplish the mission on time?
I think China at least need to be both on the demand side and supply side to deal with the issue. On the supply side, China have to change energy mix. Right now, it's 85% fossil fuel. By 2060, most likely, it will have to turn around to become 85% clean energy. China have used 40 years to build this fossil fuel-dominated energy system and have to use another 40 years from now until 2060 to change around. China will move forward both in terms of the hydropower as well as the nuclear power. But both, I think, has a limited potential in both clean energy sources. So what is left is really wind and solar. So let's say that in the future, by 2060, wind and solar will become the major electricity source or energy source. There are a lot of problems that need to be dealt with. One is instability. How can a system deal with this instability? We are going to see, because of the weather, extreme weather coming more frequent. You are going to see a very unstable weather condition. On the other hand, you are going to have a very unstable energy system. So how to meet the two and to make sure that the people has enough energy, stable energy, is an enormous challenge. That's on the supply side. On the demand side, I think that before we talk about energy conservation, it's really meant to improve the energy efficiency. But from now on, really have to improve efficiency continue. The other one is recycling economy. Try to use limited resources and then to produce more. And the other one, I think, is becoming more and more important is to change the economic structure. In other words, we produce a lot of high energy intensive products, and that I think also need to be reduced or controlled to a certain level to do somehow that to control the energy demand.
That was Professor Lin Bo-chung from Xiamen University on China's commitment in lowering its carbon emissions. Various measures are underway to protect the Yangtze and Yellow Rivers, two major waterways flowing across China. Wen Jie has more.
The Yangtze River winds its way over 6,300 kilometers through many Chinese cities, bringing rich biodiversity, minerals, and water resources in its basin. But its water quality and aquatic life have long been under threat from pollution and overfishing. A decade-long fishing ban has been introduced in key areas of the longest river in China to fight against depleting biological resources and degrading biodiversity. Law enforcer Le Ziyu from Chongqing along the Yangtze River explains how they will deal with those who illegally fish during the moratorium period.
We will try to dissuade them at first. If they continue fishing, regardless of our dissuasion, we will confiscate the fishing tackle and even place a case on file for investigation.
A new law on conservation of the Yangtze River officially took effect earlier this month. It bans a series of activities that may cause harm to the river, including the transportation of highly toxic chemicals and construction of chemical plants within 1 kilometer of its banks. John An with Costco Shipping Line Company says their staff have been trained to avoid the prohibited activities.
For ships carrying goods containing highly toxic substances, we have made arrangements to change routes and unload the goods at another port. We will not provide services to transport such goods on the Yangtze River.
Protection of another major river in China, the Yellow River, has also been reinforced. One of the measures is to plant more vegetation. A project is underway to build a shelter belt circling Dongping Lake in Shandong province, which is also an important backwater reservoir in the lower reaches of the Yellow River. Dongping County official Li Shengguang says the project is expected to decrease water pollution.
Various species of arbor, bushes, as well as aquatic plants will be grown based on their capacity of absorbing and degrading pollutants containing nitrogen and phosphorus. The project will solve the problem brought by the discharge of agricultural wastewater upon its completion.
More than 4,800 tree planting activities have been held across Shandong since the beginning of the current spring season, with over 600,000 people taking part. Environmental protection programs in 9 cities in the province along the river have been launched. It includes 93 construction projects with an investment of more than 40 billion yuan, or about $6.4 billion. They cover various fields, including flood control, water conservation, and biodiversity protection. For the Beijing Hour, I'm Wen Jie.
Job seekers with learning disabilities and difficulties communicating are getting more opportunities in China as more supportive methods are being offered for them to find employment. Zhou Feng has more.
Wei Lai has been working as a waitress for 6 years in a coffee shop in Beijing. Unlike other workers in the shop, she has an orange mark on her apron, which indicates that she has a disability.
Now I have a job and salary, and I can support myself. It is the biggest comfort to my parents, and they have relaxed a lot. My mother can spend more time learning swimming and dancing. My father can enjoy collecting antiques. They don't have to always worry about me. My family is getting happier.
Due to a congenital defect, Wei Lai finds it hard to communicate or learn new things, which creates challenges when looking for a job. Figures show that the number of vulnerable people suffering from the same challenges has reached around 20 million in China. The coronavirus outbreak made the situation worse for people with these conditions when they try to find jobs. Li Hong with the Gun Foundation, an NGO dedicated to helping the disabled, says supportive employment services for people with disabilities will help to alleviate stress when seeking employment and help them better develop themselves.
Job counselors should play a supportive role. They need to first evaluate the disability and then provide suitable jobs based on enterprises' recruitment requirements. The counselor will provide constant support until they find stable employment.
The counselors have a major role in supporting job seekers with disabilities. They provide tailored training services for the vulnerable group to improve their capacity to fulfill different job demands and help enterprises understand how to interact. Wang Chao with Easy Car Life says her company has successfully employed 11 people with disabilities thanks to the support of job counselors.
We were worried about whether customers and other employees could accept these people, but the job counselor has helped them to adapt. Providing more opportunities will help them find personal value so families do not have to suffer so much.
Figures show that over 90% of people with disabilities will lose their job without a job counselor. Meanwhile, Xu Jiacheng with the China Association for Rehabilitation of the Handicapped says although China has changed the concept from special care to support services in terms of taking care of the vulnerable group, more improvements are also needed for the job market.
We should pay more attention on community governance and highlight the function of community. If a small group of people in the community can change their stereotype, it will have a huge impact, and the employment rate will improve a lot. We need to utilize the internet. Through online and offline service, we can better support them. We also need to encourage their autonomy and motivation to discover how to provide the necessary support.
She believes supportive service will help handicapped people better integrate into society and realize their values. For the Beijing Hour, I'm Zhou Fang.
It's 27 minutes past the hour. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's warned that it would not be sensible for any country to impose blockades on vaccine supply chains. He made the remark as the European Union considers stricter controls for coronavirus vaccines in a bid to secure more COVID-19 shots for its 27 nations.
I would just gently point out to anybody considering a blockade or an interruption of supply chains that companies may look at such actions and draw conclusions about whether or not it is sensible to make future investments in countries where arbitrary blockades are imposed.
An EU blockade policy would specifically be a blow to Britain. The country is leading major economies in the rollout of vaccinations. The latest figures show that 45% of Britons have had at least one vaccine shot, compared with less than 14% in the EU. Meantime, the British Prime Minister ruled out any move to further limit travel across the English Channel. The top U.S. infectious disease expert says the nation's not turned the corner yet on the coronavirus pandemic, despite a rise in vaccinations. Dr. Anthony Fauci says that a number of daily infections is still too high in the country to declare victory against the virus. We're at 28 minutes past the hour. Checking the forecast ahead of the break. And Beijing today will get sunny skies and 23 degrees Celsius. A low of +6 this evening. Chongqing's overcast and 21, then dips down to 14. Lhasa is cloudy and 14, a low of +2. Hong Kong's getting clouds and 25 degrees on the day, and then it's down to 20 overnight. In North America, Washington, D.C. will be mostly cloudy on Thursday and 24 degrees Celsius. New York City's getting showers and 19. In Africa, Nairobi's mostly sunny and 28. Finally to Oceania, Port Vila's mostly cloudy and 28 Celsius. It's time for a short break. So far this hour, China's State Council Information Office has released a report on human rights violations in the United States. The Chinese government's issued guidelines to make the country's manufacturing sector stronger. The British Prime Minister has warned against blockades affecting vaccine supply chains. Shane Bigham with you. Stay with us here on the Beijing Hour.
Join the most popular Chinese language learning page on Facebook by searching for CRI Learn Chinese. It's a quick yet fun way to achieve your language goals. Start your free lessons now with unlimited videos, photos, and text tutorials on expressions and Chinese culture. CRI Learn Chinese Facebook page. A world opens with 你好.
The Beijing Hour. The Beijing Hour.
The Beijing Hour brings you an hour of comprehensive news and information from both China and the rest of the world. A mix of news, sports, and entertainment. In-depth analysis of the day's big stories, as well as the most comprehensive business of the day. The Beijing Hour, your very own window to China and the rest of the world.
A million, a billion, or maybe a gazillion years ago, a giant split open an egg. Then came the lady giant, who made people, and Mr. Curious, the botanist, Mr. Handyman, the Baron on the tree. This is our new season of Chinese folktales, and we will explore the ancient, mystical world together. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen.
Examining the events that impact and shape China and the rest of the world. This is the Beijing Hour, 1 hour of news and information brought to you every weekday. Now here's your host,
Shane Bigham, with you on this Thursday morning. Still to come, in business, China's major state-owned banks are now promoting the country's digital currency. In sports, the Olympic torch relay in Tokyo. In culture and entertainment, a new show at the Shanghai International Dance Center. There are several ways to contact us. You can talk to us on Twitter at The Beijing Hour or visit the Beijing Hour page on Facebook for more news, videos, and analysis. Now today's headlines. The Chinese president inspected the city of Fuzhou during his trip to Fujian province. Xi Jinping visited Fudao, a 19-kilometer-long pedestrian walkway, as well as an optical lens company. He learned about local efforts in urban planning and development and the protection of historical and cultural blocks, as well as corporate innovation and development. Senior Chinese officials called for sustained disciplinary inspection and supervision work to ensure the smooth implementation of the development plan over the next 5 years. Zhao Leji is secretary of the CPC Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. He made the remarks during his inspection tour in Guangxi Autonomous Region. He urged supervisory efforts at the grassroots level to oversee the implementation of government policies and measures. He also called for supervision over the promotion of poverty alleviation and rural vitalization. Chinese authorities have said the China-EU investment agreement was designed to benefit both sides and is not a gift given by one side or the other. The statement from the Chinese Foreign Ministry came after the European Parliament cancelled a meeting to discuss that deal. China and the EU jointly announced the completion of negotiations on the agreement at the end of last year. A Chinese government spokesperson has rebuked certain European countries for summoning Chinese ambassadors after China announced sanctions against 10 individuals and 4 entities within the EU. The spokesperson said prior to the Chinese sanctions, the EU had unilaterally sanctioned Chinese individuals and entities under the pretext of alleged human rights issues in Xinjiang, which were said to be based on nothing but lies and false information. The official also said the EU acted first with an unreasonable provocation, and China simply responded in a legitimate and just manner. A report says air quality in Beijing has improved in the last few years thanks to the implementation of clean air actions. The report was released by a group of leading British and Chinese scientists. More than 150 scientists have spent 5 years conducting one of the largest air pollution field campaigns in Beijing. The scientists have found that sources of key air pollutants in the city center are much lower than predicted, but concentrations were still relatively high back in 2016 and 17. Researchers also discovered that cooking oil emissions are a source of potentially hazardous fine particles in Beijing. The report also says road traffic is not a major source of primary PM 2.5, but remains a significant source of nitrogen oxide. The head of the International Chamber of Shipping has raised concerns about the impacts of the current blockade of the Suez Canal to worldwide trade. A skyscraper-sized container ship has become wedged across Egypt's Suez Canal and blocked all traffic in the waterway, threatening to disrupt global shipping. Guy Platten says the Suez Canal is one of the most strategic waterways in the world, as it carries around 12% of world trade annually.
We're already seeing evidence that ships are starting to gather at the entrances to the canal, both ends, and so that process, that logjam, is starting to grow as every hour that passes. So it's a really serious incident. It shows you how fragile the global supply chains can be at times, and as we rely on shipping to deliver all that medical equipment, the fuel, the food, the other supplies. This is quite a critical moment.
The Ever Given, a Panama flag ship that carries cargo between Asia and Europe, ran aground in the Suez Canal on Tuesday. On Wednesday, tugboats strained to try to nudge the obstruction out of the way as ships began lining up in the Mediterranean and Red Seas. It remains unclear what caused the ship to run aground or when that route will be reopened. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson's warned that it would not be sensible for any country to impose blockades on vaccine supply chains. He made the remarks as the European Union considers stricter controls for coronavirus vaccines in a bid to secure more COVID-19 shots for its 27 nations.
I would just gently point out to anybody considering a blockade or an interruption of supply chains that companies may look at such actions and draw conclusions about whether or not it is sensible to make future investments in countries where arbitrary blockades are imposed.
An EU blockade policy would specifically be a blow to Britain. The country is leading major economies in the rollout of vaccinations. The latest figures show that 45% of Britons have had at least one vaccine shot, compared with less than 14% in the EU. Meantime, the British Prime Minister ruled out any move to further limit travel across the English Channel. This is Shane Bigham live from the Chinese capital. Coming up in business, China's major state-owned banks are now promoting the country's digital currency.
Join the most popular Chinese language learning page on Facebook by searching for CRI Learn Chinese. It's a quick yet fun way to achieve your language goals. Start your free lessons now with unlimited videos, photos, and text tutorials on expressions and Chinese culture. CRI Learn Chinese Facebook page. A world opens with 你好.
We're at 36 past the hour now. Turning to business, starting with a look at the markets, Wall Street's major averages gave up earlier gains to finish lower on Wednesday, weighed by a sell-off in tech names. The Dow Jones was roughly flat. The S&P 500 lost more than 0.5%. The Nasdaq shed 2%. U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen testified in Congress on Tuesday and Wednesday. Powell assured lawmakers that inflation will rise, but won't spiral out of control. Yellen hinted at forthcoming tax hikes, especially a higher corporate tax rate. On Tuesday, Wall Street suffered a pronounced loss, which saw the 30-stock average slip more than 300 points. In Europe, German stocks edged down on Wednesday, with the DAX dropping 0.4%. British stocks rose yesterday, with the FTSE 100 up by 0.2%. In France, the CAC 40 in Paris was nearly flat. Stocks in China closed lower on Wednesday, with the benchmark Shanghai Composite Index down 1.3% and the Shenzhen Component Index decreasing more than 1.4%. Market analyst Timothy Pope has more.
Chinese onshore stock markets really continue their slide today, along with most of the rest of Asia. Lily, the Shanghai Composite fell 1.3%, and the benchmark CSI 300 dropped by 1.6%. That ended below 5,000 points, its lowest close of the year so far. It's down more than 16% since its peak in mid-February, when it was up near 6,000 points. We saw setbacks for a number of key sectors today. Materials were foremost among them, after reports that China may consider selling some metals from state reserves to cool off prices in the commodity sectors. Aluminium producer Chinalco shed more than 6% here in Shanghai, while Huayo Cobalt was leading the selling today, down by 8.4%. There was also some bad news for airlines. Investors have started to worry a little bit about the pace of vaccinations globally, which are going to be key for any kind of a resurgence in the global travel industry. Budget airline Spring was down 10% in Shanghai, while flag carrier Air China was off by 5%. We saw some minor gains for consumer staples thanks to reports of possible product price rises at some liquor makers, but it was nothing like enough to offset the losses being incurred elsewhere.
That was market analyst Timothy Pope. Hong Kong stocks also closed lower, with the Hang Seng Index slumping around 2.2%. Elsewhere, stocks in Singapore closed lower, with the Straits Times Index decreasing around 0.3%. In Japan, the Nikkei went down around 2%. China's 6 main state-owned banks have started a campaign to promote digital yuan wallets. The country's central bank is issuing the digital yuan as an alternative to paper money with legal backing from the government. People can now apply to take part in trialing the e-wallets at bank outlets in Shanghai. They can use the wallets on many online retailing platforms, including e-commerce giants JD.com and Meituan. They can also use them at vending machines on the Shanghai Metro and at many of the city's shopping malls. With more on this, we're joined by financial analyst Cao San. Good morning, first of all. And what is the likely impact of the digital yuan on the way that commercial banks operate in the future?
Well, the main impact is already in place. We are transitioning into a cashless society. So it's the digital currency that will be widely used. So in the future, whenever a customer goes to a bank, they don't really have the paper money to deposit. It's really just digital currency, and everything will be just based on technology, and the in-person processing of money will be reduced.
So a number of commercial big hitters such as Alipay and WeChat Pay in China and the likes of Facebook and Apple further afield are eyeing a piece of the global digital currency market. So how does the state-backed digital yuan differ from other digital currencies?
Well, the digital yuan will be a sovereign currency. It's just a different shape and the form, but it will be transacted using the existing platform like Alipay and WeChat Pay. These internet platforms will still be using the sovereign currency produced by the central bank instead of their own currency.
Well, China's stepping up efforts to promote buy-in of the digital yuan this year. So what signal is Beijing sending to the financial sector by doing this?
Well, the signal is that the central bank currency is the currency of the future. I think it will send the signal that the other alternative currencies like cryptocurrency will not be favored vis-a-vis the central bank currency, and the central bank currency will remain the legal tender within a sovereign jurisdiction.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. That was Cao San talking us through the latest initiative by China to promote the digital yuan. 42 past the hour, China's announced a joint venture between global financial messaging service provider SWIFT and 4 domestic institutions. The country's central bank says the new entity will offer localized financial services and make cross-border transactions safer and more stable. The People's Bank of China says the joint venture will provide financial gateway services to domestic users of SWIFT. It'll build and run local network concentrations and local data warehouses. China continues to open up its financial sector to foreign investors. This has created a growing need for domestic institutions to use the cross-border financial network and information services provided by Belgium-based SWIFT. China's central bank says some small and medium-sized banks in the country had previously reported unstable connectivity to the SWIFT network. Didi is helping restaurants in Mexico to survive amid the coronavirus pandemic. The Chinese giant's better known for its ride-hailing service, of course, but it's now coming to the rescue of a sector decimated by COVID. Alistair Baverstock has more.
When the pandemic first hit last March, Marisa Sierra, who runs a paella restaurant in Mexico City, feared she would lose her business. Yet 1 year later, she's selling more than ever. Her loyal client base has simply changed the way they buy from her, today through the Didi Food delivery app.
We would sell mainly on weekends for special events, but when the pandemic arrived, all of those stopped. So I believed the business would fail. But the big surprise was that our clients began ordering every day of the week. And instead of selling one large paella for 30 people, I would sell 30 individual portions around the city. It's the delivery food business that has sustained my business.
Today, Marisa makes most of her sales through the to-go counter beside her kitchen. Since Didi Food first arrived in Mexico in 2019, the company has continued to grow. And a big reason for that is while the competition like Uber Eats and Rappi have sought to sign large chains, Didi has actively sought out even the smallest businesses to sell through its online platform. So for small, popular local restaurants like this one, Didi is customers' first option. More than 35,000 restaurants, from international chains to tiny kitchens, are now trading through Didi Food across 34 Mexican cities. Andrea Vidales is the marketing director of Didi Food in Mexico.
Every restaurant has its own challenges, and we have ensured that we have personal account managers to help restaurants get used to the technology. Because at Didi Food, we understand that the only way for us to succeed is if our restaurant partners are succeeding.
But it hasn't always been smooth sailing. Costs must be adjusted, presentation methods adapted, and business models changed. Francisco Fernandez is the president of the Mexican Restaurant Association.
For home delivery services to have suddenly become so important overnight was difficult, particularly for restaurants who weren't set up for it already. Some businesses even ended up failing. But if clients are going to continue using these services, and we believe they will, then we are simply going to have to adapt to new methods.
As the restaurant industry faces a different business landscape, even after the pandemic, it's companies like Didi Food whose business models will help them to adapt.
That was Alistair Baverstock reporting. Geely's announced plans to create a luxury electric vehicle brand. The Chinese automaker is investing 2 billion yuan to develop and bring the Zeekr to market. Zeekr will be taking orders for the first model of the new brand at the Auto Shanghai Car Expo that's scheduled to run between April 21st and 28th. Zeekr is aiming to bring to market at least one new product per year over the next 5 years. And Geely says the new product line will serve as the focus of the company's efforts to create smart and energy efficient vehicles. You're listening to the Beijing Hour. Coming up in sports, the Olympic torch relay is set to begin in Tokyo.
This is China Plus. We bring you the latest news and events making headlines in China or around the world with a Chinese perspective.
I declare the Beidou 3.
After receiving a notice from the United Nations,
citywide testing is the best and ultimate way to curb Hong Kong's outbreak of COVID.
We give you the why and the how behind the stories so you can better understand the reactions of those involved.
More than 63 million people have been affected by
all of TikTok's middle to senior level executives at its US business are US
Who knows on a dinner plate that every single grain means...
Subscribe to The Top Story to learn more about the world in which we're living and the future we all share on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen.
It's 47 minutes past the hour now. Turning to sports now, and here's Yang Guang.
Thank you, Shane. The Tokyo Olympic torch relay begins today, heading to the opening ceremony of the postponed games on July 23rd. Social distancing, mask wearing, and limited crowds that are prohibited from loud cheering will be the order when the relay starts from Fukushima Prefecture. Local residents are wary of the pandemic but are still looking forward to the event.
During COVID-19, people are stuck at home and are getting stressed. While it's getting warmer, people are waiting for sports and events. You get excited and the flowers are starting to bloom. I'm really looking forward to it.
When I heard it was starting in Fukushima, it really felt like the Recovery Olympics. And I was very happy.
The Olympic flame will be carried across Japan's 47 prefectures with 10,000 runners expected to take part. The first runner will be Norio Sasaki, who coached the Japanese women's team to the Football World Cup title in 2011. However, team captain Homari Sawa has dropped out of the event due to health reasons. If COVID-19 cases pop up and if there are delays during the torch relay, it could send up red flags about the feasibility of holding the Olympics. The Beijing municipal government has introduced a special action plan to improve the international language environment for the Olympic Winter Games. The plan is aimed at standardizing foreign language science, improving foreign language service ability, and better guidance for social participation in the capital city. It also urged the legislation on the international language environment, including the use of foreign language science in different types of public places. The plan also proposes to enhance public service hotlines by providing high-quality remote translation services in 8 languages. In football action from the European 2022 World Cup qualifiers, world champion France was held to a surprise 1-1 draw by Ukraine to get their qualification campaign underway. Antoine Griezmann gave France the lead with a left-foot striker, but Ukraine showed their resilience, forcing an own goal from French defender Presnel Kimpembe for the equalizer. Elsewhere, current world number 1 Belgium came from behind to beat Wales 3-1 in their opening qualifier. Netherlands suffered a surprise 4-2 defeat by Turkey in their Group G opener. Reigning European champions Portugal made a winning start as they edged Azerbaijan 1-0. England plays tomorrow against San Marino. Germany takes on Iceland, while Italy hosts Northern Ireland. In tennis, Daniil Medvedev says he's not feeling any pressure now that he's number 2 in the ATP ranking, nor is he chasing the top spot. Fresh from capturing his 10th ATP title in Marseille, the Russian player now has his eyes on the Miami Open, where he's the top seed.
When you step on the court, there's 2 people, so it's a 50% chance to win, kind of. But I feel confident in my game. I know that when I play good, I'm tough to beat, and that's the most important. And I feel like to be number 1, you most probably will need a Grand Slam, unless you, I don't know, make 4 finals and you win 5 Masters in a year. But it's a different story, so I'm not looking forward at all.
Success in Florida may pave the way for Medvedev's further success in New York at the US Open later this year, where he reached the final in 2019. Third seed Alexander Zverev just won the Mexican Open title, and the German player is hoping to build on the momentum of that victory.
I mean, last year, I think everybody remembers the US Open final in a way where, I was 2 points away, which was very upsetting to me, but it gives me kind of extra motivation for this year. I want to do well. I want to kind of show that I can win the biggest tournaments in the world, and Acapulco is definitely a big stepping stone, but I don't want to stop there.
In the first round action in Miami, Yelena Ostapenko beat Chinese player Wang Xiyu in 3 sets in the women's singles.